all they probably do is squeal, but chill. When we start the revolution, when we start the revolution, all they probably do is squeal, but chill.
I would like to say, first of all, the Jewish people built Holocaust museums in all of America's major cities. And they, Holocaust, don't even rank #1. Here on the monitor, we have one of the primary causes of the African Holocaust. This European is named Prince Henry, the navigator, though he never went to sea. What Prince Henry did was, he sent the first ships down around the African coast in 1441 that began the enslavement of African people. Then in 1442, Prince Henry went to the Pope in Rome, and he had him declare all the lands that the Portuguese had visited Portuguese territory. No consideration whatsoever for the people who already lived there. Then he did more than that. He had about 3 more what they call papal bulls. This was a document signed by the Pope. And then in 1454, he had another one signed giving Portugal all of the African coastland. That's West Africa, South Africa, East Africa, and North Africa. 90% of this coastland was places the Portuguese had never been. But by this Catholic priest, a Pope. Now Portugal now owns all of Africa.
And wasn't it that Pope, Pope Pius, that split the world and gave the eastern half to the Portuguese and the western half to the Spanish?
Now at this point, the Spanish complain. They say,
my question, brother, who gave the Pope a planet to split in half? I mean, that becomes the real issue.
White folks believe that the world is theirs to control as they so wish.
So that's just straight up arrogance.
Right. So the Spanish complain. They say, you've given all that land to the Portuguese. What about to Spain? He said, I give to you all the eastern lands not yet discovered. Now, a curious thing about that, while the Portuguese and the Spanish haven't been there, they knew about the eastern lands. It turned out the Moors had been there. Prince Henry the Navigator, who never went to sea, was in possession of Moorish maps, and he knew there was lands to the east. That little image we see right there is one of the queens.
See, we have
a lot of times we talk about the white boy.
Right. And we often leave out the white woman and her involvement in her role in our Maafa.
And this is one of the European queens who was involved in the slave trade, where the European governments became rich on the back of African slaves. And when they went into Africa, they didn't just take the people. In the 14th century and 15th century, the Portuguese took out 700 tons of gold from Africa. The Western African elephant today is extinct. They carried out so much ivory. They took out pepper spices. They took out palm oil. They took out rubber from rubber trees. That was a little later on once they found a use for it. But not only did they strip the land of its people, they stripped all the natural wealth from Africa, all the diamonds, all the gold, all the silver, the spices. So it was a rape of not only the people, but the land. Now, if we go back, and here's another
one.
Louis XIV of France. Later on, the French and the English get involved in the rape of Africa. And Brother Tehuti, many times we think we're just talking about individuals. We're not talking about individuals.
That's right.
We're talking about governments, if you want to expand on that.
Well, yeah, see, and what we want to do is connect the faces. You see, because a lot of people will run around and holler about, well, Africans were the ones that sold y'all into slavery. But here go Louis XIV. No Africans were at that meeting when they declared a unilaterally war on Africa. We weren't there to sell anyone. And what we must understand that these were governmental institutions. Slavery was not some lone individual evil white person. It was the whole institution. And that's why tonight we're not letting anybody off, and we're going to show the faces who initiated war, captivity, chattel slavery. See, we going after all of it tonight. Okay, here we have the Arabs. See, we're not letting anybody off. The Arabs played a major role in the Afrikan Maafa. Baba Fred?
Many times people think of the African slave trade as having just one arm, the transatlantic slave trade. There were two other arms. There's the trans-Sahara slave trade and the trans-Indian Ocean slave trade. Altogether, in the enslavement of African people, we had 50 million people taken into captivity. 30 million went on the transatlantic slave trade. 20 million went on the trans-Sahara and trans-Indian slave trade. And we'll talk about the mortality rates that our ancestors suffered a little bit later in the program.
Okay. Now what I want to go to back up, we're talking about governmental institutions. Well, I want to read a little quote here from Thomas's book, Hugh Thomas. And we're going to read just a brief little passage right here, right quick. And this is The Filthy Voyage, let's see, page 291. And he goes on to state here that the Atlantic slave trade was much more of its long life, a governmental enterprise in the concerned countries. So he backs it up. He validates that this wasn't any isolated individuals, but it was a governmental enterprise. And he goes on to state, in some ways, though the concept of the slave trade acting as an individual is misleading. For the most important slave voyage were financed by partnerships with 6 or more merchants participating in the cost of the voyage, perhaps associating again and again on other occasions in smaller ports. So here we have documents backing up that this was governmental. This was whole nations committing genocide on African people.
I'd like to mention one governmental agent that many of us are familiar with. In the year 1605, England joined the slave trade. In the year 1605, the King of England was King James I. This is the same individual whom many of our preachers hold up the Bible every day, the King James version of the Bible, the Word of God by way of King James. 6 years before King James became involved in the writing of God's holy word, King James had formed the London Trading Company. King James was involved in enslaving African people. His money came from the back of our ancestors. His money came from the slave trade. There was no money in printing the Bible. King James' only interest in printing the Bible was to put in the Bible incorrectly, to have it say that kingship was divinely ordered by God. He was concerned about his head because the King of France had lost his. But King James made his money in the slave trade, in the capture and enslavement of African people. King James I, the authorized, holy Word of God, a slave trader.
Brothers and sisters, we have to come to grips with reality. We have one more quote from Hugh Thomas, and then we're going to take a couple of phone calls. But it's interesting that they showed the picture of Pope Pius II. See, because nobody's getting off tonight. We're going after all of the participating parties that were involved in the Afrikan Maafa. And Hugh Thomas goes on to state that all Christian denominations, what did he say? All Christian denominations were involved in the slave trade, but usually the dominating religion of the port concerned decided the religious complexities of the merchants. So all religious institutions were also involved, along with governmental institutions, okay? So, I mean, they're not getting off talking about, well, we church and we some holy kind of people or holy rollers or anything like that. No, you played a part in the Afrikan Maafa, and you're going to have to pay a part in paying blacks held captive here in America and all across this globe reparations. You're not going to escape. Let's take a couple of calls. Caller, question or comment? Caller? Caller? Okay.
While we're checking the phone, I'd like to say something about the history of chattel slavery. The Bible says, a great evil shall come out of the north. He was talking about Midal, the land of the Gentiles. In 1441, a great evil came out of the north. In 1441, Prince Henry the Navigator sent Portuguese slave ships down the west coast of Africa. That began the African Maafa. Now, chattel slavery itself wasn't invented in 1441. That's something else we have to blame Rome and Greece for. Chattel slavery goes all the way back to Greece, where 25 to 50% of the people who lived in Greece were slaves. Aristotle defined a slave as a tool that talks. Roman civil government defined people into two classes, slave and free. The definition for a free man was not a slave. This is Roman civil law, slavery. This is an institution developed by what they say was their high culture, their high society, the Greeks. We don't have any history of chattel slavery nowhere in Africa. They say there was African slavery in Africa. That there was some bondage in Africa, and people who was held captive in South America was many times treated as union members of the group or the nation to which they were members. If you remember the story of Joseph from the Bible, Joseph supposedly was a slave. But this does not stop Joseph ride within the ranks of power. The chief priest of Kemet gave him his daughter in marriage. He became the number 2 man in the government of Kemet. This never happened in American slavery. In American slavery, a slave was at the bottom. It was a caste system. Slavery became, he was like an untouchable. He was like a non-person. He was a non-human being. This was not the case in Africa. This was not the case in North America. This was something new. This was the great evil that came out of the north. It began for us in 1441 with Prince Henry, the Navigator, and the Portuguese slave trade on the west coast of Africa.
Okay. So what we like to do now, as we see all of this information that's been transpiring, the first actual act was an act of war, was invasion. Okay, we were invaded by Europeans seeking to save themselves. We were attacked. So let's see, can we go to some more video documentation actually showing the war on African people. Okay, here we have the war. This is an attack. This is war. This comes before captivity. Okay, and what we must understand that in the beginning, these Africans would not dare to sell anybody. Okay, when Europeans sat down and decided to enslave Africans, when Pope Pius gave one half of the world to Portugal and the other half to Spain, when Prince Henry the Navigator decided to trade in captive Africans, when Bishop Bartholomew de las Casas got involved, Cristobal Colon, all of these Europeans, Africans were not there. So we must understand that the first act to occur was war. Okay? Now we must understand what took place and how our people became subject and dominated by the Europeans and Arabs and Jews and all of the other, so many were involved. See, this is not a one-sided thing, and that's why we're trying to go after as many participants as we can. See, We're not leaving anybody out. We're going to expose them all tonight.
And Brother Tehuti, we'd like to take a look at what was the effect of this great evil from the north coming into Africa. What condition have they left Africa in? Today, when we go and look at the African nations, we find that many small African nations that exist when the Europeans came there are today extinct. If we go look in the Caribbean, all the islands that we now know as Haiti, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Trinidad, Jamaica, these places were not vacant. They were all settled. But today, the Caribbean Amerindians are extinct. You can't find one. If you look in North America today, you'd be lucky, as Brother Oscar would say, to find 2 million Native Americans. But there were 30 million when the Europeans got here. If you look at the number of Africans that died in the Maafa, you have over 100 million. If you look at the number of people who died in North America, Central America, Caribbean America, and South America, here again, the Europeans are responsible for the murder and death of over 100 million people. We're not talking about the Jewish Holocaust tonight. We're talking about the Maafa. We're talking about things unprecedented in the history of this planet. All of this was done under the Christian banner. All of this was done in the name of God. All of this was done what they call manifest destiny. Their goal to rule the planet at any cost.
Okay.
Many people no longer exist.
Now, Barbara Fred, I have another picture here that shows the aftermath of a war and how our people's heads were chopped off and bodies dismembered and just laying all over the place and left there. See, these are the kind of attacks, and these are the kind of psychological, on a subconscious level, the fear that was embedded on our people still exists. Many of our people are afraid of white people today and really don't understand exactly where the fear is coming from. But it's these kind of horrible atrocities, okay, that our genetic subconscious experience that's still present with us today. I meet a lot of brothers and sisters, you know, that's just outright afraid of white folks, afraid to even mention their name. When we go out talking about reparations, you know, they'd rather us to use all kind of old abstract terms, that, you know, the Klan or the man downtown. But we have to name these Europeans and name these white folks and these Jews and these white women and these Arabs that caused the Maafa, genocide on African people. And this is genocide, brothers and sisters. Look, heads are dismembered from the bodies. And these are the kind of atrocities that African people went through on a daily basis for over 500 years. Bubba?
I think the other thing we have to remember when we talk about the African Holocaust is that we're not talking ancient history. The African Holocaust continues today. Today, we have, I would say we have probably several hundred people murdered annually in this country, the land of the home of the brave and the land of the free, by the Klan, the new Klan, the police. The largest gang in America, who shoot Africans down on sight, unarmed, with no repercussions. This year along in Tennessee, 2 young African American males in Memphis have been murdered by the police. In Nashville, this year, 3 young men have been murdered by the police, unarmed. 2 Africans, 1 Asian. Nowhere do you see in the paper a European male or female, unarmed, gunned down by the police.
Okay, let's see, can we get the lines working now? Let's try and take a call. What's up, caller?
Yes, hello, how's it going?
What's up?
All right, I want to ask a question. As an African-American in America, and I've learned some stuff about the King James Version. It's been changed. You know, a lot of books have been taken out.
Yes, sir.
What are we, you know, what am I supposed to go by, you know, because I want the truth. You know, I want the truth, like, for me and my family and my children.
Okay.
Because you know, I just learned something else about King James, how he was part of the slaves.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, I don't want to go and read nothing under him, King James Version. You know, I don't want to go through none of that, because is that God's word?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't think it is. That's why I'm asking a question. What am I supposed to read and go by as a black man?
Okay, we'll see if we can answer that.
Thanks very much.
Asante.
Okay.
Barbara Fred?
I think divine inspiration never came to the white man. Divine inspiration came through Africa 4,000 years before white people began to write. The ancient doctrine of salvation, heaven, resurrection is an old African concept that came out of Kemet, what the Greeks called Egypt. If you go back and look at some of the ancient that came out of Kemet, what the Greeks called Egypt. If you go back and look at some of the ancient documents, if you look at the book of Coming Forth by Day and by Night, you'll see all the principles that the Europeans and other people called Hebrews adopted for their Bible. Jesus Christ is not the first crucified and risen Savior. He's the 33rd. Atharu, an Egyptian and Kemet king, is the world's first crucified and risen Savior. Before Jesus Christ came on the scene, crucified and risen Saviors was found in Africa. They were found in Europe. They were found in Asia. They was found in Mexico. This is an old story. There's nothing new in Christianity. I think you need to look back at the African religions that the Europeans have taken this from. There's another saying that goes, says everything that the Europeans have told you about himself is a lie. Everything he has told you about us is a lie. Everything he says he has discovered or invented, he has stole from someone else. And that's also true from religion. Religion is an African concept. Anytime you talk about resurrection, heaven, life after death, that's an African concept. And I'll point out one other thing. Before the Europeans came into Africa, the Europeans burnt their dead. They didn't bury their dead. If someone is burying their dead, they already have the concept of the body raising up from the grave and living again. Before the Europeans came into Africa, only Africans buried their dead. The Greeks and the Romans learned that from us.
Okay. Santi, let's take another call. Caller?
Yeah, I just have a question. I just wanted to know, you're talking about you pretty much want to hold everybody accountable who had anything to do with the slavery.
Absolutely.
What about your own ancestors who basically sold the black people to the European people?
Okay.
How do you plan on handling that?
Okay. Santi. Well, if you'd have been listening a little bit earlier, we pretty much already dealt with that. You see, when these Europeans decided to declare war and invade Africa, no African kings were there to sell anybody, okay? We wasn't there. Now, what you get is later on, after this invasion had taken place and so much captivity and enslavement were taking place, you had some African groups forced due to survival. You either capture some people or you're going to have to take their place. So it was more of a survival thing. But we have documents that goes back to when the Europeans first came to Akebu land, to Africa, and they document the way the people were, how the people lived, and talked about how beautiful the people were, and then turned right around and go on to recommend that these hospitable and wonderful people be made slaves to work and sow and do all that is necessary and adopt their way. So I mean, we can't get caught up into this Africans sow other Africans. The day Queen Elizabeth, Prince Henry the Navigator, Pope Pius II, Bartholomew de las Casas, the day they decided to declare war on Africa, we were not there to sell anybody. So you can't use that, okay? And that's pretty much the answer to that.
I'd like to comment on that. And I have in my hands a little book here. This little book is the history of the Negro that Brother Oscar Exum from Memphis, Tennessee, co-chair of the Memphis chapter of NCOBRA, was very happy to loan me. And I got it a little bonded because it's 100 years old. I don't want to destroy it. But in this little book, there's a quote from what they call a missionary, a European female missionary who was really a European female invader. And she writes, in the 1500s, of her first encounter with the Africans. And this is what she had to say. Their manner was such that it was impossible to take offense. Their code of morals was perfect. The naturals are the only virtuous people that are to be found anywhere on earth. Those were our people before the Europeans got there. We knew nothing of crime. We knew nothing of stealing. We knew nothing of all the offenses that the Europeans came in. Homer, Greek writer, wrote about Africa. He said when Jupiter, father of the Greek gods, takes a holiday, he goes to the banquets of the blacks, a people humble, courteous, and devout. We were religious people. Now what about Europe in the 1400s? What kind of condition was Europe in? Well, Europe was diseased. The plagues had just ran through Europe in 1340 and 1350. 1/3 of the population had died, the rest of them was sick. Europe was broke. They were hungry. Kings and queens couldn't read and write. They were illiterate, and they were poor. They came out of Europe. They were looking for food. They were looking for wealth. They were looking for gold, precious minerals, diamonds, all the things that Africa had to offer. Europe had nothing that we wanted. That trade was strictly a one-way trade.
Absolutely, and we must be careful, because you notice when Europeans refer to that period, they like to refer to it as the Dark Ages or the Black Plague. But we have to change that terminology. It wasn't the Black Plague, it was the White Plague. But, Barbara, we have another picture that we like to show. And this is what happened to many of the resistors, people that resisted enslavement. And here we have a picture of a man being hung with a hook by the ribs alive, and were allowed to suffer hours upon hours upon hours, a hook through the ribs, and just leave you hanging there in agony. You see, and these are the kind of things that our people saw year after year, day after day, hour upon hour, and this is what transformed the African man and woman into the Negro slave. And we must understand, you see, when we want to talk about forgive, before you can forgive, you have to first know your story. Now, this is horrible, to hang a man by a hook through 2 ribs until he just suffer and die. And this is the kind of thing that went on, and this is the kind of thing that our people had to witness constantly.
Now, I'd like to point out one other thing about this type of torture that came out of Europe. This was developed by the European Christian Church. If you remember the Inquisition came up with all kinds of horrible ways to kill people. They had what they called the triple death. In the triple death, they would hang an individual, man or woman, until he was nearly dead. Then they would cut him down. Then they would split him open and let his bowels fall onto the ground. That was the second death. But he's not quite dead yet. And then the third death, they would tie him between 2 horses, and they would draw and quarter him. This is what Europeans did to each other before they came into contact with Africans. They were already experts in torture, murder, rape, and mayhem. This is the plague that descended on Africa with Prince Henry the Navigator, King James I, the author of the authorized version of the Christian Bible. This is the death and destruction that they brought on African people.
Okay, and brothers and sisters, make no misunderstanding. We are not showing these pictures to try to appeal to some morals of Europeans. We understand that they do not have morality that you can appeal to. We understand this. These images and this program is designed basically to teach African people about their Holocaust, their Maafa, their suffering. Because before we can heal, you must first know your story. We must first understand what are the conditions that went into creating the Negro slave that is still perpetuating itself today, 135 years So say after the end of slavery, we still see our people psychologically in the same pitiful condition. Okay? We have another picture we want to show. The death marches. Marching our people from the inner Congo and the inner parts of Africa to the coast where they can load them on ships. Many of our people died just on the death marches. Okay? And we got to understand this went on day after day after day. Okay? Here's another shot. We have the death marches where some of our people were too fatigued to make it. They shot them on the spot. Okay? And we got to come to grips with this and understand what was going on. Here go another picture of just bodies that they're just dumping. People who resisted, some of the people who just collapsed from the fatigue, and here they are disposing of the bodies. Okay?
Brother Tehuti, I just showed 3 pictures, but let's take a look at what we're looking at in numbers. After Europe declared war, unilaterally declared war on Africa in 1441, 30 to 40 million Africans died in battle in resisting the invasion. 30 to 40 million Africans died, this is the second 30 to 40 million, not the same one, died from famine and disease brought to African million was taken into captivity. This is over 100 million people. Now, once these people were taken into captivity, 30 million went on those forced marches from the interior of Africa to the Atlantic Ocean. On that forced march, approximately 8 million of those people died, leaving 22 million to reach the Atlantic Ocean. Once they reached the Atlantic Ocean, they were held in captivity for months at a time, ill-fed, no clothes, stripped naked, treated worse than an animal. 4 million people died on the coast, waiting for the ships to arrive. Then once the ships arrived, we had 18 million was loaded onto the slave ships for the transatlantic slave voyage. A third of those died, leaving only 12 million out of the 30 million that started to arrive in what we now call the Americas. That's only one arm of the death march. We had another arm that went across the Sahara and the trans-Indian Ocean. On that, we start off with 20 million people initially. 7 million of those died just on the march to reach the oceans or crossing the Sahara Desert, leaving approximately 13 million to be taken into captivity in Arabia, North Africa, and Europe.
Let's go back to the lines. Caller, question or comment?
Hello?
On tap.
What's up? Yeah, I've been keeping up with it in Cobra for a few years now, and I think less than 1% in the United States of black people are in Cobra or listen to y'all at all. And then what I get from y'all give out a lot of disinformation, a lot of falsehoods, a lot of confusion. And what y'all two are really trying to say, which other people like Brother Dow and Brother Austin, all them, what y'all really want is black people to arm themselves and start a war against the white people. I mean, that's all y'all trying to do. Y'all out sitting right there, stupid, trying to make war against the white people. I mean, seriously, man, what y'all trying to do?
Get to the point, man. What's your question?
My question is, y'all got all kind of papers. Who drew this? You was there to draw this? I mean, we know there was slavery. There was slavery in Egypt. We know that. We know the Egyptians.
I have a question for you. I have a question for you. When you say there was slavery in Egypt, what documentation are you using to say there was slavery in Egypt?
God's word.
In other words, you're using the Bible.
That's right.
Are you aware that there's no documentation outside of the Bible that the Egyptians or the Kemet people ever held slaves?
Let me tell you something. I was watching, they were looking at Egyptian tombs. They were finding some tombs. They got like 10,000 mummies they were uncovering. You're saying the Egyptians were all black. But if you look at these mummies, some of these mummies are white.
Let me ask you another question.
What's that?
From what era did they uncover the white mummies? Because at the end of the Egyptian kingdom, they were invaded by Greeks and Romans. So from about 300 A.D.
So you're saying that Moses the Moses written in captivity? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying there was never a Moses.
Oh, boy, the devil is the author of confusion, and you're sure working good for him.
Okay, well, look, thanks for your comment, but I want to try and address one of the issues that he said, that we're trying to get black people to arm themselves and go to war with white people. That's not our aim. Look, first of all, if you study international law, there's a three-phase process that people use to get justice and get their liberation and reparations. The first step is to file a legal claim, and we've done that within COBRA and several other organizations that have filed a legal claim against this wicked government, okay? That's step number one. Now, once we've used up all legal remedies and proved our case, and they still refuse to pay us, then we make a demand, okay, where we say we want our reparations, we want our full citizenships, we want all of the things that war against crime, crimes against humanity, all of those things. We put a demand on it, we put a time limit on it, and we say we want our money by this time, and if you don't give it to us, then we go to step 3, and that's to get it by any means necessary. In international law, that provides that if you are held captivity and you cannot get justice, then you can get it by any means necessary. And I say, yes, we make war on them the way they made war on us, but we want to do it by the legal means, and the first steps is make our legal claim, make the demand, and then step 3 is to get it by any means necessary.
And I would say one other thing. Right now we are at war, and our war is for liberation of the African mind. The chains have been taken off, but the chains remain on our minds. We think and act as slaves. What we're talking about is freeing our minds so we can stand up and talk and act like free people.
Okay, let's try it again.
Holocaust, and that's what we call the middle passes. The first part we talked about was the Death March. That was the first part of the African Holocaust. The second part is what they call the middle passes. That's when we were loaded on ships, herded like cattle, and we died on those ships in great numbers. The mortality rate from the middle passes for Africans was over 60 per 1,000 per month. At the same time, Africans was shipped on these ships, European criminals, murderers, rapists, and other ancestors of the caller who just finished calling, was also herded on ships. They were sent to prison colonies, Georgia, Maryland, Australia. What do you think their death rate was? Ours was 60 per month. What do you think their death rate for prisoners? Was 2 per month. So in other words, they know how to treat people humanely. These people, criminals, were given adequate space, adequate food, was allowed fresh air, was allowed clean drinking water, the things that our ancestors never got. And of course we owe, and we're not going to stop until we receive them. Okay. Let's look at some more images from the middle package.
Here we have, right here.
There's a clip.
Perfect example of what our people went through.
The middle passes.
Yeah, yeah. Throwing us overboard.
The living, the dead,
There's a picture that said that the sharks still run that route 100 years later. They were fed so well that the sharks still travel those same routes today. Yeah. But you know, Bob, I would like to go back and address the previous caller on the issue that we clearly understand, and that's our whole argument about, how we understand that these white people just can't seem to be spiritual. Any African person would understand that an injustice was done, and it is incumbent upon them to make it right. See, we understand the concept of ma'at. What goes around comes around. See, we understand this process, but most of them will deny and scrape and scrap to try to get out of it and say they had nothing to do with it, but they were the beneficiaries, okay? And they must come to grips with this. Even this mythological Bible that they say they believe in tells them that the sins of the father will be passed on to 7 generations, And they just don't want to deal with it. So that's why we can't spend any time trying to appeal to the morality or to their spiritual side, because we see it just ain't happening.
I like to show this picture. This is a picture of a hole, the belly of a slave ship. This is how our ancestor was packed in there, where you didn't have room to turn. You were chained together. You couldn't go to the bathroom. If you had to urinate or defecate, you had to lie in it. If someone got sick and threw up, you lied in that too. They say the slave trade was a filthy voyage. You say they could smell a slave ship from 5 miles away. They say a man has more room in his coffin than you had in the belly of these slave ships. If someone got sick, you all got sick. And that's why we died. Okay. I like to say something in terms of reparations. Everybody say they believe in the Bible. But they say if the Hebrew children had been enslaved in Egypt, when they left, they received reparations. It said the Egyptians gave them great wealth, and they came out with great substance. Before they took African slaves, enslaved Africans, and brought them over here to the Americans, they brought their own people, indentured people. They served for a period of, say, 7 years, and when they was released, they were paid. They had what they call free money, freedom funds. You were given tubes, you were given money for your crops. When Africans were released from slavery, we received nothing to this day.
Okay. Well, I see we're running out of time. Callers, don't hang up. We're going to be in the studio, and we'll be more than happy to take your calls and try and answer any questions you may have. Be sure and join us for part 2 of the Maafa, Genocide on the African People, on August the 20th at 10 o'clock p.m. Also, be sure and join next week on Channel 5. Be sure and join us next week, The Naked Truth, and we'll be dealing with the issue of reparations, and should blacks held captive in America be subject to taxation without reparations. And these are some of the critical issues that black people are faced with here in the year 2000. So, Baba Fred, we're going to go back to the phone lines, and callers, don't hang up. We'll be here. Caller? Caller?
Yeah.
Question or comment?
Yeah, I just want to know, it just seems like y'all not appreciating being here in America right now.
Well, we not. You know, we second-class citizens. We get harassed. We get stopped driving while black. We getting lynched.
I'll tell you one thing right now. I mean, I'm European descent, but yeah. I'm glad that I'm here instead of being back in Europe.
Yeah, but you're benefiting from all of your ancestors that came before you, and here we are catching hell because we've been deprived. We've been deprived of our reparations.
Hey, what are your cousins doing in Africa right now? Let me ask you that much right now.
They're struggling against white oppression. That's what they're doing. They're trying to get their liberation.
The same thing they've been doing for hundreds of years.
No. They've been doing the same thing since the white man got there. But before that time, we have documents, historical documents from white scholars that say these people live in harmony with nature and with the universe until the arrival of the Europeans.
You want to go back to that kind of life that they're talking about right there?
Absolutely. If the white man would leave, we'd be happy to go because we knew we could make it.
And when I go back, I want all the diamonds, all the ivory, all the gold that you've taken out of Africa. I want it returned. Then I have something to go back to.
Do your cousins even know what the ivory and gold and all that's worth?
Today, trillions of dollars.
Right.
So make your point, bro.
That's what it's worth, but maybe it wouldn't be that much worth that much in the spiritual society you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, what's your question? Huh? Make your point.
No. My question is, look. All I'm saying is I don't understand why you're not grateful for living in this great country we live in right now. You understand?
Oh, man, look. Hey, bro. I want my reparations. I want to be compensated.
Reparation? Hey, you know how many of my ancestors have been slaves?
How many?
You don't know?
No.
I don't know either.
Well, but I know how many of mine been enslaved.
You're going back so far that you can't touch them. You can't touch any of your ancestors that have been slaves either.
Why not? I'm a slave.
Can you touch them? Have you ever touched them in your life? No.
Hey, I'm a slave. I'm a slave descendant. I'm not a citizen. I don't have human rights. I got civil rights. Okay? I'm not a citizen of the United States of America. I'm a citizen of the United States. That's a legal phrase, some legislation, you see? I don't have any of the rights you have, and you want me to be happy with some granted civil rights.
You have the exact same rights.
No, I don't.
You got more.
No, I don't. Have you read the law? You ever read the law? You ever read the 14th Amendment, the 13th Amendment?
The law, that would require me to read like so many binders of crap that I don't feel to sift through, but I mean...
But see, I've read it.
Specific thing.
You see? But we've read it. We've studied these documents trying to get a grip on what is our real status. So we studied these...
This is the same as everybody else, and it's 10 times better than I guarantee you your 20th cousin or whatever that's living in Nigeria. So what the hell is it? What are you griping about?
I'm griping about I want my first-class citizenship. I want reparations for working my...
First-class citizenship here in the best effing country in the damn world. So do I, and I'm glad of it too. I mean, I tell you what, I wouldn't want to be living in France or Germany or any kind of crap right now.
I think it's one of the most biased countries in the world.
It very well could be, but you know what? It's biased because people can tell what's on their mind.
Oh, that's what it is?
Yeah.
Well, see, but see, we're not just up here complaining. You see, we demanding our reparations, and one way or the other, we're going to get it.
You want some money for what? What do you want money for? I mean, what have you personally? What personal struggle have you gone through?
Crimes against humanity. Crimes, working my grandparents for 300 years for nothing.
Listen,
okay?
I didn't hear any argument against me, or from me.
But see, look.
That shit's all totally wrong. I mean, that shit is just completely from base one wrong, okay? But, you gotta understand, I mean, if you look in a historical perspective of the history of the whole world, okay? This shit's been going on forever.
Well, everybody that's been abused been paid except Africans. See, that's my argument. Every ethnic group that any kind of
I gotta agree with you.
they've been paid. So why, if everybody's been paid, why we can't be paid? Now that's my question to you. Why we can't be paid?
Well, the only thing I have to say about that is I don't see why the Jews are being paid, okay?
Not just the Jews.
They don't really deserve it neither, okay?
So you against anybody getting paid?
No, because look. We're not living in any kind of like perfect thing when you think of when you're a kid and you got a little coloring book and you color everything in it. It's all drawn out for you. This is the world, okay?
Right.
This is wild, fucking free. You got countries killing other countries, and it is a damn thing.
Okay.
Right now, we're sitting at a point in time, we got a little stability. I mean, we're living in the greatest society that's ever been on Earth. So what the hell, I mean, we can't just sit here and focus on that kind of crap that you're talking about.
Okay.
Things that have never been resolved.
Okay, thanks for your call. I see that we're not going to get anywhere on this. You have your point of view and we have ours, but we have truth and justice on our side, so we will get reparations one way or the other.
I got truth on my side, too.
Now, you got some lies and some mythology you working with, see? But we talking about...
You know, you were talking about on the TV, Bible and all that crap. I don't work from any of that crap.
Right. Well, you can't because there's a lot of nonsense.
Right,
you know?
Exactly. I agree with you on that point, 100%.
Okay, thanks for your call, Sanjay.
All right.
Caller?